Okay, geweldig. Could you see the Gemara?
I don't need to have a Gemara in front of me.
Okay, perfect. So we are up to the Mishnah on Daf of Gimel on the base. Before we start the Mishnah, it's going to be relevant that we had a whole bunch of cases that the Mishnah discussed of Pesha Asar, Hareu Pesha Hitter, and therefore we believe the people who had that Nemanus. So the first case we had was that if Reuben goes over to Shimon and tells Shimon, you see this property that I have? It used to belong to your father, but I bought it from him. So there we say a Pesha Asar raised a Pesha Hitter. You only know it belonged to your father because I'm telling you, and I'm also telling you that I bought it. So that's the first case where there was an amonis. The next case where there was an amonis was a case of Adam. Adam said, yes, this star, it's our signature, we signed it. However, we were either minors, or we were coerced, or we were psula edus. Again, we say Pasha Asar raised a Pesha Hitter. They don't,
Yes,
you can't collect with that star.
not what you feel.
Yeah.
I should take this
No.
one.
Then we had another case of Pesha Asar. Then we had a case of a woman who said, I was once married, but my husband died or my husband gave me a divorce. Again, we say there, Pesha Asar is a Pesha Hitter. And then we had a case where a woman said, I was captured, but I was not violated. So that's the fourth case of Pesha Asar. So we have all these cases of Pesha Asar that the Gemara is going to want to analyze a little bit right after we learn the Mishnah. So let's start with the Mishnah. V'chein shnei anoshim, if there were two men, ze omer kohen hani, one man said I'm a kohen, v'ze omer kohen hani. So two people come and they each say about themselves that they're kohanim. The halach is einam nemonim, they're not believed, and we will not give them truma to eat. Ubizman shehem meidin ze ez ze. But if each of them is saying testimony on the other one, then Harei Elu Nemonim they're believed, which tells us that an Eid Echad is believed to be Michael a Kohen Truma. If a Kohen can bring one Eid to testify that he's a Kohen, we will give him Truma. Rashi says something very, very interesting. Rashi says on the first wide line, Uvizman shemeidin zeh zeh, Shekol echad omer ani v'chaveirai kohen. If you learn the Mishnah by itself, I don't have to say anything about myself. The Mishnah says if Reuben tells me that Shimon is a kohen, and Shimon tells us that Reuben's a kohen, we trust him. But Rashi says that's not enough. Rashi says I also have to say I'm a kohen. So the Rashash is medayik from Rashi that if someone says that he's a kohen, if someone has an aid that he's a kohen, it only makes him to a kohen if he has independent knowledge of that. If he said, I have no idea, and he's telling me I'm a kohen, then we wouldn't feed him true. Zok the Mishnah weiter. Ubizman chen miten ze asar reil nemon. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ein mailin lekahuna al pi echad. Rabbi Yehuda says we would not be able to trust an echad to make someone into a kohen to give him truma. Amar Rabbi Lozer. Rabbi Lozer says, Amosai. When do we say that an Eid Echad is not believed? You need to aid him. If there are people that are suggesting that this coin is puzzle, when no one is contradicting the fact that this person is a coin, then even an Eid Echad will be able to be mal lakuna. So we now have a three-way machlokes. The Tanakama holds no matter what, even with ma'arin, an Eid Echad would be neman. Rabbi Yehuda holds an Eid Echad would never be Neman, and Rabbi Lozer holds an Eid Echad is Neman only if there's no one contradicting him. And Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer, which is a fourth shita, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Askan, Ma'il Lekun al Eid Echad. That seems to be the same thing as Tanakama, and the Gemara will explain. At least Rashi tells us that the Gemara will explain later on what the difference between Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer and the rest of the Tanoim are. So before we go weiter, this opens up a huge machlokes. What is the halacha? Normally, the Gabba gets up and says, "V'sigal v'sherbal v'sherbal v'karoi v'yachim v'sherbal v'sherbal v'Yisrael v'cheinu l'chesed v'rotzim v'noim marmein hakoil v'godel l'lekenu v'shnukoi v'latayra." And then he looks around, Kohen, is there a Kohen here? And if there's a Kohen here, he pipes up and says, "I'm a Kohen." And then he calls him up. If there's no coin there, he says, Ein kan koin, yamod b'm koin. So the question is someone believed to say, I'm a kohen? Now, if we're talking about people who we know in shul, we know they're kohen, that's not a question. But let's say there's a guest in shul, and he says, I'm a kohen. Are you allowed to give him kohen? So this is a massive machlokes between the Rambam and the other Rishonim. The Rambam learns you do not believe a fellow to say he's a kohen, which means if he comes to shul and he says a kohen, I want to get an aliyah kohen, you don't give it to him. If he says he wants to duchen, you don't let him duchen. A person is not believed to say on himself that he's a kohen. The Ramach, Moshe Kohen, who is quoted by the Ramah and who the Ramah passes is like, is of course if a guy says I'm a kohen, you're going to give him you'll give him kohen. What's the big deal? And the Ramach's kind is, what's the big deal? So if worse comes to worse, he's a Yisrael, and you gave him kohen, what's the big deal? There's no great problem here anyway. The Rambam is concerned, the Maggid Mishnah explains, that if we give him kohen, we might also let him eat truma, and that could be a problem. And the Ramah says, nowadays, who's eating truma? So what's there to worry about? Yeah, if you're in a place where people get truma, yeah, maybe you wouldn't give someone an aliyah kohen if he says he was a kohen. But nowadays, where no one's eating truma, there's no reason not to allow somebody to say the kohen and give him an aliyah. So getting an aliyah is not a big deal. But duchening, the Gemara is going to tell us that it says kohen sevarchus b'nei Yisrael amor lahem. There's an assay for a kohen to do birchas kahanim. And we learn Michlal Lavat Hashemeyahem. We learn Davka Kohen B'nai Yisrael. So there's actually an Isra say for a Yisrael to get up and duchen. So how can we let someone duchen if there's an Isra say? So one of the Meforshim on the Shulchan Aruch speaks out. This is in Nebuchadnezzar Simon Gimel that the duchening there's an Isra say for Yisrael to do that using the Shema Meforish like they did in the Beis Hamikdash. But the duchening that we do, there's no iser, so therefore we'll believe anyone to say he's a kohen, because even if he's not, there's no aver. Okay, Zok Tehele B'Gemara. Kol Hani Lomali. Why do we have 4 examples of a Pesha that's believed? We have the person who said he bought the field from Reuben's father. We have the Edom. We have the woman talking about her husband who died. And then we have a woman who's captured, and we have now here these 2 kohanim. Zok Gemara Kol Hani Lomadi. Why do we need all these cases? Zok Gemara Tzrichi. I'll tell you why we need them all. Titana Moide Rabbi Yeshua. If the only example of Pesha Osar was the case of the field where Reuben told Shimon, I bought this field from your father, you know why we believe Reuben when he says I bought it after he already said that it belonged to your father? Is Mishum Dikadror de moment. Nobody in their right mind would risk the ownership of their field by admitting that it used to belong to somebody else's father, unless he was right away planning to clarify that he had purchased it. So that's one big edus. So the edus of saying that it was once your father's field, but I bought it, it's one edus. You don't split them. And you don't say I'm believed here and not believed there. Because of course, no one would say something to jeopardize their ownership of their field. But when Edom are saying we signed this star, but we were coerced, the lekadror demomina, they don't really care here. They don't have any interest here. They're saying edus. The question is if the Malva will be able to collect from the loiva. But either way, the Edom have no financial impact here. Emaloi, maybe 2 separate edusim. Maybe first they were Makayim the star, they said we signed it, and now that they want to say they were puzzled, maybe they're not believed. Vitan the Edom, and if it only had the case of Edom that they're believed, Mishum de la Alma. You know why they're believed? Because they're definitely not Negebadav. They're not biased, because there's no money that's going to come to them, or they're not going to lose any money regardless. But in the case of the field, Dili Nafshe, where he stands to benefit greatly if you accept his second edus that he bought it, and he will lose a lot if you don't. So maybe maybe he should not be believed. So that's why we need the first 2 cases. Now I'm going to turn to Daf Chav Daled Amar Aleph, which is the Heintige Daf. So that's why you need the first 2 cases. Zok Gemara, well, what about the 3rd case? If we only knew that the Edom are Neman with the Pesha Asar, and the purchaser is Neman with the Pesha Asar, Mishum Demamina. It's a question of money, so worse comes to worse, the money went into the wrong hands. But when you have a question of an Eisha Shish, a woman said I was married, but my husband died, the Isura, this is a severe Isser. Maybe there you don't trust her. Emaloi. So therefore, it had to say the case of Eshesh. Frank Gemara, okay, we got the first three cases, but Nishbesi, Utayrani, Lomali. Why did we need a Mishnah to tell us the case when a woman says, I was captured, but I'm Torah, that I'm mutter to a kohen? What chiddush do I see in that I don't already know from the fact that a woman could say, I was married, but my husband died? Zok Gemara, very simple. Bishum de kaboy lemisni, because you're right, for the basic halacha of Nishbesi Utayrani, for the basic halacha of Nishbesi Utayrani, that's not a chiddush. The chiddush is because the last sentence in the Mishnah, was, we're on Chov Daled Amud Aleph, 4 lines on the top. The Mishanisis Boed. What if this woman said Nishbesi Utayrani, and then she married a kohen, and then after she married the kohen, Aiden came and said she was Nishbesa. So it undoes her Pesha Asa retroactively. So you would think that now she has to leave the kohen. And the Mishnah tells us, she doesn't have to leave the kohen. So that's a very big chiddush. So really, Nishbesi Utayrani is not required. We would have known it anyway. The chiddush is that even if she got married, Dr. Moy, that's really good. That works out very well according to the Amoira, who learns that the Mishanisis Bo Edim Harezu Loiseitze is referring to the case of Nishbesi Utayrani. Elalaman, the Masila Reisha, the Madam who learns that line of the Mishnah is going on the Eshesh who said, I was married, but my husband died. Michael Meimar, now there's no chiddush whatsoever in Nishbesi Utayrani. So why would the Mishnah give us an extra case of Nishbesi Utayrani? Zok to Gemara, because the case of Nishbesi introduces the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah is the chiddush. Mishum the kaboy the misli shtei noshim shenishbu, because in the case of shtei noshim shenishbu, we had shtei noshim shenishbu. Each one is believed to say that the other woman is Torah. What do we need? Why isn't that a chiddush? She might tell me, what do you mean? It's a chiddush that an Eid Echad, one woman is the menace to say that this other woman is Torah. Zok Rashi, we don't need this Mishnah for that, because there's a Mishnah later that makes that very clear, that b'shvuya hikilui, that even accept the ages of apostle aid in order to be matter. So back to the question, why do we have the case of Nishbesi? Zok Gemara, I'll tell you why. There's an extra chiddush here. Here there's two women who were both captured, and they're saying that each other is Torah. Well, how do you know they're not making a scam? Maybe they're both Tomei, but they're telling each other, listen, if you cover for me, I'll cover for you. It looks really bad that they should be believed, because really they can make this deal amongst themselves. You might think you have to be choshish that they're helping each other and they're colluding and they both shouldn't be believed. Kamash Malon, that they're believed. Even though there's good reason to believe that they are colluding and they're just helping each other, they're still believed, because the Shvuya Kilu is a kula that even in such a case where we're choshish that there's a reciprocal agreement, we still believe them. Okay, so now let's get back to our Mishnah. Why do we need the case in our Mishnah where one kohen is believed to say that the other guy is a kohen and vice versa? What chiddush do we learn from there? Because in our Mishnah, in fact, Rabbi Yehuda argues. Rabbi Yehuda holds, in fact, that the Eid Echad is not Nemo. That's why our Mishnah is relevant. The Rabbanan Shita by itself, yes, it's consistent with everything we learned before. The chiddush is that Rabbi Yehuda argues. Beautiful. Now we're going to drill down a little bit to understand, why does Rabbi Yehuda argue? Why does Rabbi Yehuda hold that one kohen is not believed to tell us that the other kohen is a kohen? Ani kohen, the chavera kohen. Nemon la'achiloi b'tshuma ve'nei nemon la'asir isha. So this is basically the same halacha as our Mishnah. If someone says that Yen is a kohen, the Eid Echad is believed, together with the kohen himself, saying that I'm a kohen, only to let him eat truma. But he's not nemon la'asir isha. Now, what does la'asir isha mean? There's no restriction for a woman to marry a apostle kohen. So exactly why does he need to prove his yichus to marry? Fine. So why do they need to prove his yichus to marry? So Rashi tells us a big chiddush, and Rashi says it's the second line from the top of it. Nemon lachila b'truma ben nemon l'seisha miyucheses. They were very, very makbid on yichus in those days. And here you have a girl who could trace her lineage back to Aaron HaKohen. She doesn't want to marry somebody who's not perfect. So we would be makbid on two edim for such a girl to maintain her impeccable yichus. We would be makbid on two edim claiming that her husband is a kohen b'yichus. My liba Tosfos does not like this pshat at all. And Tosfos asks, and I'm on the first wide line of Tosfos. Pirish b'kuntris mishum chashash mamzeres u'nesimus. The concern is this woman, no matter how miyuchesa she is, she doesn't have to marry a kohen. She can marry Yisrael. So obviously there's a chashash, there's a mamzer. So we need to check it out very carefully. V'kosher for Tosfos. The lahaki lekal mechish. You're never worried that someone should be a mamzer. We tell him, Zil Gali, go to a different place, or marry someone like you. Mashma, if we're telling him go to a different place where they don't recognize you, if he goes to a place where they don't recognize him, Yasiu Bas Yisrael, they'll allow him to marry Bas Yisrael, even though we don't know who he is. And we don't assume, we don't concern ourselves that maybe he's in a sin in the mamzer. So Tosfos brings multiple Gemaras to prove that you don't have to prove that you're not in the sin. You don't have to prove you're not a mamzer. So then what exactly does the Gemara mean here that you need two edim to verify the yichus of this claim? What does it mean in our Gemara? Beduka midaladi mois. She has to be budded from four mothers. And I don't know this Gemara in Collusion, but I assume we're talking about if a kohen wants to marry a girl, he has to make sure that she is boduk, and we know that her lineage going back is all pure. He has to go back four mothers. The ein nemon, and he wouldn't be believed in Yisa Isha Beduka Lahachir Bitoy Lakoyin Beloy Bedika. Elo Yitzterach Livdek Achara. Here the question is not so much for him, but let's say his daughter wants to marry a kohen, then you have to be boyded for Doris. He's going to have a problem here if he doesn't have it. So the Lasia Isha means not so much for his marriage, but for a daughter that will be born from his marriage. In order to protect her yichus, we need to make sure that he has two agents to say that he was a kohen. Beautiful. So Rabbi Yehuda argues, just like he argues in our Mishnah, and he says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af einoi nemon la'achiloi b'truma, ad sheyehu shloisha. You need to have three kohanim that come, and for each kohen, there's two agents that say that he's a kohen. Ad shloisha, and shnayim idem al zeh, u'shnayim idem al zeh. And really, the Rishosh says, let's just say, that all three people are going to have two edim to be machshir. And when there's two edim, you're not worried about anything. So, what is the reason why Rabbi Yehuda holds that the eid is not believed? Remember, Rabbi Yehuda chayis l'goyim. This seems to indicate that the reason why Rabbi Yehuda doesn't trust the Eid to say someone's a kohen is because maybe they have a deal between them. I'm not a kohen, you're not a kohen, but we'll come to town. I'll say that you're a kohen, you'll say that I'm a kohen, and then we'll take care of each other. And we cannot trust you. So Zok Gemara, is that what you're going to say? That the Rebbe holds we can't trust you. For Rabbanan loy chayshim l'goyim, and the Rabbanan are not choshish that there is such a concern. Well, if chashminalu, but we learned the opposite. The Rebbe Yehuda is not choshish for goyim, and the Rabbanan are. So I'm going to give you a typical example of goyim. It's when one makes a sacrifice to show that his friends is offering a good product. And then he might do the same for you in a different place. So everybody knows the very famous story where there was a Chidish Yid sitting on the steps of a church trying to collect money. And he was sitting right near a galach. And of course, all the goyim who would normally maybe give a penny or a nickel or a quarter to the galach, they saw a Jew sitting there, they would have to spit in the Jew's face and put $10 in the pushka by the priest. And this is going on, and a yid sees there, a yid standing there, and he sees the yid sitting there, and he's thinking this guy is sitting in the wrong place. So he goes over to the yid and says, "Yid, maybe this is not the best place for you to collect money. Maybe sit in front of a besmedrash." So he says, "Eshkoyach," and then after this yid goes away, the Chassidish yid sitting there leans over to the guy and says, in mind, dat ins lernen, wie zu machen Geld. Right? That's a famous story. But that's a typical classical case of Goyim, where they play on each other to help each other make money. So we're going to have another example of such a case. It's not. Yeah, that's right. Here's the Goyim doing it. Oh, it's the Eden doing it. It's the Eden doing it. You're right. Hachamorin shenichnasu le'ir. These are people who buy things out in the country. They buy produce out in the country for cheap, and they bring it into the city to sell it at a profit. And there's two guys here together with a whole bunch of pears. V'lamar echad man, and one of these two people with his donkey or his cart full of pears says, "Shali chadash, my produce is new." It doesn't mean the Isser chadash because the Amoritz is nemon for that. It means it's new and moist, and the wheat's best after it sits out for a couple of months and it dries out. So he's saying my product is inferior, v'shel chavera yoshin, and my friend here, his product is superior to my product. Then he says, "Shali edim masukin." I didn't take off trumas and maisus yet, which means if you buy from me, you're going to have to be mafresh trumas and maisus. But v'shel chavera masukin, my friend already was mafresh to trumas and maisus. So basically, it's one guy praising the other guy's product. So you might think, since he's praising the other guy's product, not his own, he's to his detriment, and in Emon, he's not believed. That's the Tanakama. Why? Because you're choshed, they have a deal going. That in this village, this is what I'm going to say, and then I'll sell out. And the next village, you'll say the same thing for me, and then I'll sell out. So you don't trust him. Rabbi Yehuda, I'm Emon. So you see clearly the opposite. Here you see Rabbi Yehuda holds you not choshed for Goimlin, and it's the Chachamim who are choshed for Goimlin. You have to flip around Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. And Rabbi Yehuda holds you're choshed for Goimlin, and the Tanakam holds you're not choshed.
The Mechlef Sashet is about the Chamul?
I believe so. Abai says, no, it's not a steer at all. You sure, Rabbi Yehuda holds a Goimlin, and that's why you cannot trust the Kohen. But the Demai Yikilud, this is a case of Demai. It's a suffix if they were masaking the pears or not. By Demai, they're Mekel. You know why? Because the whole Demai is a Chumr Yisera. Roiv Ami Haaretz Mashni. Really, Roiv Ami Haaretz take off Meiser. So there's no problem with Tevel. So because of that Chumra, we're not going to be worried. You have an Eirechot saying that his friend's Tfua was Masukin. So really, he's Chosh for Goimlin, but by Demai, they're Mekel. So that answers the stira in Rabbi Yehuda. But we have a stira in Rabbanan too. The Rabbanan by Yas say you're not Chosh for Goimlin, and by the Chamorin, the Rabbanan say you are Chosh for Goimlin. So I'm a Rava. Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda Kasha, Rabbanan, the Rabbanan like Kasha. You think it's only a stira between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, and you answered it well. But what about the Rabbanan, the Rabbanan? How are you going to explain that? Ella, the Rabbi Yehuda like Kasha, Kedishanina. Rabbi Yehuda is not shver like we answered. That's by Dmahi Kilu. But the Rabbanan like Kasha, we have a svara over here. Why are choshet for Goimlin more than by Kayhanan? Kodam Reb Chama Bar Ukva, like Reb Chama Bar Ukva said regarding something else, but we'll apply it here. It's speaking where both these parties are clearly merchants. They have measuring kalim and serving kalim. They have all the kalim that clearly indicate that they're both merchants. So it's not like one guy was a private guy who had payers and he's saying this guy who happens to be the merchant, he has good payers. No, they're both merchants. So it's pretty clear that they're helping each other. But by the two Kohanim, it's not obvious they're trying to help each other because they're not going for business. So therefore, in our Mishnah, the Kohanim are believed, but in this case, of Chamorim do not believe because it seems very much like they're trying to create some type of deal between them to help each other. That's how Rashi learns. But the Rach brought down by Tosfos, and we're going to turn over now to Amud Beis, he has a different shot. He said the Umnus Biyadoi is nothing to do with the Chamorim. It's talking about the Kohanim. It's speaking where the Kohanim didn't just talk the talk, but they walked the walk. They had kalim that are not makabel tumah. These two men who claim they're Kohanim They had kelim made out of stone or out of glolim or out of doma, which are not makabel tuma. Kohanim would normally use vessels that were makabel tuma so that they would be able to use them for truma. So since these kohanim, they were living and acting like kohanim, that's why they would be believed, Dr. Rabban. But by merchants, you don't believe them. Zot Gemara. Where did Reb Chama bar Ukva say this chiddush of Nasa biyadai proves a point? Ahadetnam Hakadar sheheniach kideiroitza v'yard lishnos. There was somebody who sold jugs. He sold jugs, and he had a whole bundle of jugs, and he had them on the street, and he needed to go get a drink. So he left them there unattended. So who knows who could have touched them and who could have been metamed. So the law is a panimiyos tahiros. So I want you to visualize a street, let's say a street that's 10 feet wide. And in those days, people built their houses right on the property line. So you have two walls on either side of this 10-foot wide street, the buildings on either side. And what he did was he took 2 rows of kedeiros and he put it up against the wall of one of the houses. So 1 row and then the second row. So the halacha is the panimiyos tahiros, the ones against the wall are tar, because people on the street probably wouldn't have touched them. But the chitzainos, the ones that are sticking further into the street, those are the ones that people probably touch. They're tomatoes. Frank the Gemara about Tanya, we have a bride that says Elul Be'el tomatoes, that all the pots are tummy. And there, Amar Reb Chama bar Ukva, you know why all the pots are tummy? V'shekli nusa biyadai. When you see a whole bunch of pots on the street, you don't know if these belong to a private person or if they're for sale. If they're for sale, imagine you're walking down the street nowadays and you see bicycles and other types of things on someone's driveway. You're not going to just walk onto the driveway and start touching the stuff. They'll call the police. But if there's a big sign that says garage sale, yes, then you'll walk onto the driveway and you'll touch and you'll feel and you'll try out the stuff because you might want to buy something. That's exactly over here. Means he had kalim that showed that he was a merchant. So even though he wasn't there for a second, if people are walking by and they see these pots are for sale, they're likely to touch every single one of them because they want to look at the products and see if they want to buy them. And that's why Elul Be'el tomatoes. And therefore, since it looks like they're for sale, everyone's going to touch them, and who knows who's touching them, they become tummy. In fact, the Gemara about Tanya, Elul Be'el tahiros, we have another brisa that says they're all tar, even though they're left unattended. That's if they're not. It doesn't look like they're for sale. They're standing on the driveway. You're not going to just walk onto someone's driveway and start touching your stuff. So therefore, they're tar. So the brisa that says they're all tamei is when it's obvious that they're for sale. The brisa that says they're not tamei is if it's not obvious that they're for sale. So what about the third brisa? How would that work out? Zog to Gemara, before we learn the Gemara's teretz, I want to make us aware of something. So imagine you have this street 10 feet wide, and there's houses on either side. Could you imagine there's probably two-way traffic, wagons are going back and forth, and people are going to constantly be smashing against the walls of the house. So it's going to damage the walls of the house. So if you're a homeowner and you don't want someone damaging your house, what you do is they'll take sharp rocks and they'll make a line of the rocks, make a little moat, a little wall, a little rock of rocks on the floor outside their house, maybe a foot or two away from the wall of their house. This way, if someone's coming down the road with a wagon, he's not going to want to mess up his wheels going on your sharp rocks. He'll stay 2 feet away from your house. If he does that, then your house won't get damaged. So that's what they used to do. This genius with his pots, what he did was he lined up his pots in front of those rocks. So now, instead of constricting the street to 8 feet, now you constricted the street to 6 feet. Now you can barely get through. So whoever walks by is automatically going to bump into his jugs. And therefore, the outer ones are going to become tummy. So let's see now the Gemara inside. And for the Gemara, the smicha l'shus harabim, you have these jugs right in the Rishus Harabim, and it's because since he narrowed the street so badly, everybody walking by is going to bump into them. The problem is a jug of cheres bumping into them, touching them on the outside, doesn't have an impact. So Mepharshim explain people wear long flowing robes, and it's very likely if they have their hand, because it's tight, space, they'll have their hand maybe over the top of the jug, maybe their beged will drop down into the jug itself. Klicheres is matama ba'viroi, and that's what we're concerned about, that they would have made. We consider the begodim of an amaretz to be medris. We consider it like a mamish tummy, like an avatuma, and therefore, if it ends up hovering in the airspace of a jug, it's going to make a tummy. But that's only the outer jugs, because people are bumping into them. The inner jugs, people don't have access to. V'boyisem. Now let's go back to our original shaila. What is the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabban? The first shot that we had, which is carried through up until this point, was that Rabbi Yehuda's choishet legoimlin. You can't trust these two gayanim. Speaking on each other is because maybe each one's trying to help the other one. The Gemara has a different shot. The boy is saying, Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanon b'mailin mitruma leyuchsin kamivli. Everybody agrees. He believes we're not worried about goyim. The problem is, Rabbi Yehuda holds that anyone who we know eats truma will also automatically assume he has perfect yichus. And therefore, we can't afford to let this guy eat truma if there's only need echad, because then people are going to also consider them amayuchas. The Rabban don't know, just because someone's eating truma, that doesn't mean anything. So therefore, there's no reason not to let him eat truma. Iboilu, first the Gemara is ashai. We have a machlokes if you're maila from truma to yuchsin. How about mishtaris liyuchsin? Ma'ul ha'lois mishtaris liyuchsin. If a star says that someone's a kohen, could you use that to prove that he's a kohen miyuchas? First, what is precisely the situation? Exactly what's the star written? If the star is merely a star for somebody else's halva, and this fellow side is an aid, and he writes Moshe HaKoyin aid, man kamasiti. Who's saying aid this on him? Viter, he's saying it on himself. So of course you shouldn't be able to be mala from a shtoris liyuchsin in such a case. Loy tzricha dichsiv be ani ploini koyin lovisi manim miplay. Rather, in this case, the koyin is the loiva, and he writes me Moshe Koyin borrowed money from Chaim, and on that star v'chasimu sahade. There's two edim that are signing on the star that he wrote. So Fregor Mai, Amona Shebishtar Kamasadi, when edim sign a star, are they only focusing just on the transaction that's recorded in the star? Or maybe when they sign the star, they're verifying that every last piece of information on that paper is true. If every last piece of paper on the last piece of information on the paper is what they're being made on, well then no problem. Then about it they're believed over here because they're saying that they're signing these a. But if we say the Edom just focus on the transaction, that they thought transaction, but they're not medayik on exactly if everybody in the transaction is a kohen, then you wouldn't have such a right. Zokimar, this in fact is a machlokes on my right. Rav Huna Rav Chisda, Chad Amar Mailin, v'Chad Amar Ein Mailin. Iboilu, Maul Halos Minisius Kapayim Yosy. Truma we have a machlokes. Star we have a socket. Now we want to know if someone duchens, is that a raya that is a kohen kosher? Zog the Gemara, Tiboy Lemanda Amar Mailin Truma Yosin, v'Tiboy Lemanda Amar Ein Mailin. Whether or not, whatever you hold by Truma, star, Minisius Kapayim would be different, and therefore we have a separate shiloh. Let's first explain the shiloh Lemanda Amar Mailin. Tiboy Lemanda Amar Mailin. Even if you hold that Truma is a raya, that someone is a kohen miyuchas, hanimili truma. Maybe dafka truma is a raya that he's a kohen miyuchas, davin misi. Because if he's not a kohen and he's going to eat truma, he's chayav misa b'dei shemayim. So there's a real nemanis. Aval nesias kapayim, but duchening the iser asay. There's no iser lav for Yisrael to duchen. It's only an iser asay for Yisrael to duchen. Rashi says the pasuk is koitz avaruchu. Es b'nei Yisrael emor lohem atem v'lo zorim. Dafka koi savarchu, dafka you koyanim should duchen, not zor. There's only an Israel say loy, so maybe it's not a right. Such a right is a koyin. Maybe he'll be willing to violate and say. Maybe forget. Or maybe no. It's an Israel say the fact that someone's duchening is a right is a koyin yuchus. Tiboy l'madam in mile. And even if you hold that by truma, if someone eats truma, it's not a raya is meyuchas. Maybe it's a bigger raya when you see his kapayim. Hanimil truma dimis achla betzina. Truma you eat privately in your home. So the fact that someone's eating truma is not such a raya, because maybe he would eat it even though he's not a kohen. When the see his kapayim dibit farhesya. The see his kapayim, you're getting up and walking in front of the whole shul onto the oven. Ilav kohenu, if he wasn't a kohen, kula hayla michta finished napte. He wouldn't dare go up, especially if he doesn't even want to carry a tune. He's going to go up there and duchen. Someone who's duchening is that's a public statement. That's a starker raya. Or no, or maybe it's not a raya. So these are the Gemara shilas. We have a machlokes by truma, we have a shaila by shtar, and now we have a shaila by Nesias Kapayim. So to Gemara, Rab Chisda, Rab Avina, Chadam or Mailin, the Chadam or Ein Mailin. There's actually a machlokes if Nesias Kapayim is a raya that someone is a kohen miyuchas. Omar lei Rab Nachman by Yitzchak l'Rava. Ma'al lahalish from Nesias Kapayim al yuchtas. What is the halacha if someone does Nesias Kapayim is going to ride his miyuchas? What do you mean? Omar lei Pukti Rab Chisda Rab Avina. We just discussed it a half a second ago that it's a machlokes Rab Chisda and Rab Avina. Zok Gemara hilchos amar. No, Rab Nachman just said I wonder who we pass him on. Omar lei. So Rava answered, I know Masnisi Yadana. I know a Brisa. And from the Brisa, I think I can prove the halacha. The Tanya Rabbi Yosy said, Gedoy l'chazaka. Chazaka is very, very powerful. Shenemar it says. Before I read this pasuk, just want to give some background. This pasuk is talking about when Ezra Sefer came back to Eretz Yisrael after Golus Bavel, after so many Eden intermarried. And the Yuchsin got really messed up because who knows whose grandmother is a goy. A whole bunch of people came back, including Umibnei Kaihanim, people who come from Bnei Chavia, from the family of Chavia, from Bnei Akoitz, from the family of Akoitz, and Bnei Barzilai, and from the family of Barzilai. Asher Lokach mi Benois Barzilai Hagaladi, Isha. A Kohen married a Yisrael. Barzilai was a Yisrael. So the reason why this Mishpachas Kuna was called Barzilai, even though they're Kohanim, is because Barzilai was a family of Yisraelim that this family married into. And they got the name Barzilai. For Yikra Shemam, and therefore they called themselves Barzilai. I guess it was a prestigious family name. Ela Bikshu Ksavam HaMesiachsim. We were looking for the Yichas brief to see if they're in fact Kohanim, or maybe these are the grandchildren of Goyim.
Golus Bavel was only 70 years.
That's right.
They couldn't remember 70 years. We're in 2,000 years in Golus.
I guess there was so much upheaval, things must have gotten messed up. They locked their Yichus brief and they didn't know. They didn't know their origins. It's like 7 years is not a lot, but vice versa, there was probably such turbulence there that things must have gotten messed up. It's a good question. It must have been really bad. They couldn't find Yichus briefings. Because of that, we couldn't assert them as kosher kayanim. They were thrown out, they were spit out from the kahuna. And Rashi tells us this is Nehemiah. And why was his name Tirshasa? Tirshasa means he got a special allowance. What was the special allowance that he got? He got a special allowance from Bezdin to be able to drink stam yain. Why in the world would they be matter him to drink stam yain? Because Nehemiah had a job. He was a sire mashke for the king. And one of the rules in those days was if you poured wine to the king, you had to drink from that wine first to make sure that it wasn't poisoned. So in order for him to be able to keep his job, they had to give him a special reshus to drink stam yain. The likelihood is if he would have quit his job, he would have probably lost his head. So they made a special allowance for him to drink yain stam. So what did he say? What did Nehemiah tell them? Lahem, asher lo yochelu mikochek mikodesh hakodeshim. They're not allowed to eat karbonos until when? Adamoid kohen l'urim v'tumim. Until the kohen has the urim v'tumim. Now guess what? There was no urim v'tumim in the second Beis Hamikdash. So he was basically telling them, until Mashiach comes, your families that could not verify that you're kohanim ksherim will never be able to eat kachim, even though up until now in Golus Bavel you were duchening and you were eating truma. Amar lahem, Nehemiah told them, haretam b'cheskaskam. whatever you were doing up until now, I'm going to let you continue to do. What did you eat when you were in Babel? The Kodesh Agvul. You ate Truma. Avkan the Kodesh Agvul. Here in Eretz Yisrael, we're also letting you eat from Kodesh Agvul, and they duchened, Rashi tells us, so they were allowed to duchen here by the Tekeh Beis Hamikdash.
Ezra did many things when he came back from Babel.
Indeed, yeah.
He was almost Taham Mamzerim.
But this he didn't do. V'sol kedaita, malin, minisiyas kapayim lo yotsin. If you hold that when someone duchens, we let him become a full kohen, how could we deal with this? Hani, even the parasi yadayu, if you're telling us that Nehemiah let them continue to duchen, also lasakinu, we're going to bring them in as part of kohanim yuchasim, and they might not be kohanim. So Elamai, we have a raya from here that ein mailim minisiyas kapayim lo yuchsin. So the Gemara was looking for a raya. What the halacha is? So Rava said, I have a raya from here. That ein mailim minisiyas kapayim lo yuchsin. Because if not, how is Nehemiah going to allow them to do nisiyas kapayim if there was a risk that they would be received as full kohanim?
Ezra was more lenient than Nehemiah to get the people to come back from Babel.
But he also made them all divorce their wives, the ones who were married to non-Jews. So he also had a tough side to them. He didn't say, come, we'll be megar them. He said, leave them home.
Yeah, but it was a different tkufa.
Yeah, it was. It was very hard to get people to come.
Ezra wanted them all to come back to Israel. They didn't want to come. A lot of them stayed in Babel.
Yeah, he only came back with 40,000 people. He was only able to bring back 40,000 people. It was a very shvach oilim that he brought. It wasn't easy. Yerushalayim was completely desolate and in ruins. Who wants to go up to a place that's in ruins where it's completely unprotected and anybody can come and kill you? It was a very scary thing. Ezra worked very hard to get them back.
But then they had how many? 400 years.
Yeah. It ended up building. They were the pioneers. They got the real estate when it was cheap. They bought apartments when they were still affordable. Yeah. So Dr. Gemara, really you could say normally you're Mila from the Sis Kapayim Yosef. So why wasn't Nehemiah afraid over there? Shiny Acha the Reyach. They had a very bad chazak. Why? Rashi tells us because everyone's going to see all the other kohanim are eating kachim. These can't eat kachim. So since they see that, it's going to stick out. And even though they see that these kohanim are duchening, they're not going to mix them in because they see a distinction between how these kohanim are treated. That's what Rashi says. Tosfos says everybody looked at them like they were not kohanim because they were called Barzilai, like we saw earlier. They called them Barzilai, which was a family of Yisraelim. So that's why we weren't concerned that people would forget and allow them to be considered miyuchasim. Zok to Gemara, you have to agree with this svara anyway, because you'll have a problem. Because there's a Tana who holds Mailam and Trumal Yuchsin, right? The way we learned earlier, Rabbi Yehuda held Mailam and Trumal Yuchsin, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. How is he going to explain it? Even the Achli B'Truma, they ate Truma over there. Also, so how is Rabbi Yehuda going to understand what happened by Nehemiah? It must be because since they had other problems, they weren't eating kachim, or we knew they were Bnei Barzilai. Because of that, Rabbi Yehuda said there was no reason for them to worry, and therefore, even though they were eating truma, it wouldn't lead to a problem. So let's go a little bit weiter. It's Kishmaka easy Gemara. So now I'm on Chaf Hey Amud Aleph. Zog to Gemara Ve'elamai Gedoyle Chazaka. So Oibazoi, what did Rabbi Yosy say? It's a great Chazaka. What's so great about Chazaka here? There's no Chashash here. We're looking for something where Chazaka is doing something that we normally don't see Chazaka do. Now it's very generic. they're able to continue eating truma and continue to duchen because there's no threat, there's no worry. So big deal. Dr. Gemara meikar echol b'truma d'Rabbanan, because until now they were eating truma d'Rabbanan, hashta echol b'truma d'Oraisa. Now they were even allowed to eat truma d'Oraisa. Or v'boisim, or you could say hashta nami b'truma d'Rabbanan echol b'truma d'Oraisa lo echol. Or you could say that they didn't allow them to eat truma d'Oraisa, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda didn't have a problem. The chimaskinim and truma l'yuchsin. Where did Rabbi Yehuda say that if a kohen eats truma, we'll consider him a yuchas? That's for truma d'Oraisa. But for truma d'Rabbanan loy maskina on, but not by truma d'Rabbanan. No, so now that you're saying they were only allowed to continue eating truma d'Rabbanan, where there's no problem, no chash. So what's the great chazaka over here? What's the great chazaka? This is a standard chazaka. So tomorrow, the great chazaka here is Yapagav the Ikal Megzer Mishum Truma d'Oraisa. Here there's a very big danger. If you let him eat Truma d'Rabbanan, he might eat Truma d'Oraisa, which is already an Isser Misa. Nevertheless, Loi Gasrinam. Nevertheless, we're not going to. Frank Gemara, Uva Truma d'Oraisa Loi Echel. Are you telling me that they won't be able to eat Truma d'Oraisa? But if we look back at the pasuk that we quoted from Nehemiah, it says Vaksiv Asher Lo Yochlu Mikodesh HaKodeshim. They only were not allowed to eat karbanis. Mikodesh HaKodeshim would lo yochel. How about Truma d'Oraisa achol? From the pasuk of Mashma that they ate Truma d'Oraisa. Dr. Gemara, no. Hachik Amar Loi b'mikri dika kodesh. Sai they weren't allowed to eat things that are called kodesh. Dichsiv v'chalzor lo yochel kodesh. And Rashi says that's Truma. The Loi b'midi dika kochim, which is referring to kochim. Dichsiv v'baskoyin kisiel lisor. He b'Truma HaKodesh lo soichel. I believe that's referring to even chazav v'shoik. Even that they're not allowed to eat. Loy toichel, they shouldn't eat. So therefore, sai truma they didn't eat, and sai kachim they didn't eat, and sai chazav v'shoik they didn't eat. So there's no concern here that they would. There's and therefore we only let them eat truma d'Rabbanan. There's no concern that they would eat truma d'Oraisa. Okay, Beshem will stop here, and we'll be mamshech tomorrow. I'm going to see if I can get a little bit ahead this week because we lose Tisha B'Av. So because we lose Tisha B'Av, I'm going to try to get a lot ahead. The Rav said we should learn next Shabbos, even though it's Tisha B'Av by B'Yom, but it would be available for Hesher we didn't learn. So we are going to be learning in Shul next week, but I'm still going to try to get a lot ahead because Sunday we're not going to be able to learn. Okay, good luck, everybody. Be'ez Hashem, we should be able to learn next Motzei Shabbos because Mashiach will come and it'll be a Yom Tov. That will be the best.
Okay. Have a good week.
Have
Have a good week.
Thank you.
Good.